Let's rock and roll. Okay, today we're going to be speaking to a really special guest. Let's start over.
That's all good. Oh, actually, I do have a question.
Okay.
Are you recording video too?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. Okay.
Although if you want, I can like literally, I got like a video editor who can just like scrub it out so that he does that. If you don't want to be on video, that's
Oh,
fine.
no, it's totally fine. I'll make sure to only pick my nose like a few times.
Okay, all right. Okay, so today we're going to be talking to Olivia Reiman, who is a really special guest who's going to be talking to us about basically overcoming depression and helping align your mind right during a breakup. So how are you doing, Olivia?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about your backstory, and then maybe we can just sort of organically get into what I'm seeing with my clients and maybe how you can help them.
Yeah, of course, of course. So my name's Olivia Reiman. I'm a mental health coach and author. And basically my story is kind of it's been a wild ride. The first 7 or 8 years of my life is completely repressed. I don't remember any of it. At age
Seven
13,
years?
7 years, all gone. It's just
You don't
just
remember it?
no.
Well, and I don't remember anything past 3, but I remember what it was like when I was wow, okay.
Yeah. Emotional trauma.
Right, right.
But yeah, so I don't remember that. And then basically at age 13, I was diagnosed with bipolar. I was also dealing with depression and anxiety, what I like to call the bad. And they tried the meds and therapy route with me. It wasn't working. And so, of course, I tried to make myself happier, fix myself with alcohol, drugs, sugar, just trying to do anything to change my mood. And also, trying to find myself or the thing that would fix me in relationships was, a huge part of what I was experiencing. And after a while and after many unhealthy relationships, then I decided enough was enough. Meds and therapy weren't working. I had heard voices when I was younger. I was prescribed antipsychotics. I had tried to end my life multiple times. It was just like not the prettiest way to start remembering your life, if you will.
Yeah.
And I finally just decided I'm done. I've had enough of this. I don't care if anybody tells me that this isn't possible to overcome, especially with bipolar disorder. And I was determined to be happier, be freer. And so I spent the next I spent almost 10 years just struggling, and then I spent the next 10 years almost figuring out how to beat it through my own means, and I did it. And I don't live with any of those anymore, and I'm happily married. I got 2 babies, and life's just been very wonderful. And so now what I do is really try to teach people, one, how to break free from any mental illnesses that they might be struggling with, because I know firsthand how much that just holds you back from being who you want to be. And I also help people reconnect with themselves and live confidently and really empowered as who they choose to be and as who they are. So, yeah.
So that's pretty amazing, first off. So when I'm dealing with a lot of people, they're going through breakups, which is a really dark time in their lives because so many of them are just so wrapped up in this one person. And oftentimes they want to get that one person back. And what we're finding, especially when we actually talk to people who succeed in getting an ex back, or even just succeed in moving on from the ex, it starts within. But most people don't really get how you can sort of like cope with some of that struggle, that the internal voices and everything that are happening within. So I'm wondering, what kind of framework did you end up coming up with in this? Basically, you said that there was like this period of your life, 10 years, where you really struggled, and then you spent the next 10 years basically coming up with a framework that worked for you. So what worked for you?
For me, the framework, and it was a lot of trial and error. It was a lot of figuring things out. But what I ended up finding, and what I actually teach in my program, Beat the Bad, is the achiever method. And so first, we focus on action. How do you step in, right? How do you start to make a change with the things that have become habitual, even with those thoughts of like just repeating thoughts, especially if like a relationship ends, right? Two is, or the, second part is communication. So communicating with yourself, but also with other people, and being able to do that in a really constructive way. That's helpful and helps you grow. Then I focus on headspace, positive perspective, shifting the way that you're seeing situations. I know I've done that a ton with past relationships, especially because my last one before my marriage was, mentally and verbally
Abusive.
abusive relationship. Yeah. And so, kind of shifting how I see that and gaining value from it.
So that's interesting. I often talk about this concept of a paradigm shift and how you need to look at things differently. But I have yet to find, when you talk to someone, sometimes you can see the light bulb moment go off for them and they finally like it clicks.
Mhm.
How have like when you're talking to people who are struggling with creating this kind of a paradigm shift with how they're looking at the situation, what are some of the methods you're using to help them achieve that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times we can get really focused on what was awful, what wasn't going wrong, or even the complete opposite of like, what was the best parts about it? And so, what I like to encourage people do is, especially when you're reflecting back in those moments, is, where can you pull value? What lessons have you learned? How can you actually gain knowledge from this that's going to empower you moving forward? And even especially with past relationships, it's like, what didn't you like? That's valuable knowledge. What wasn't working well? That's valuable knowledge. And not looking at as it, because I think when we are in that moment, we see it as a complete loss if a relationship ends. We see what we lost and we see what we're lacking, right?
Mhm.
And when you go in and dig for that knowledge and that insight and what you think worked well and what you think didn't work well, what you preferred, what were your preferences, those kinds of things, we actually start to gain something back. And so we feel like we're actually walking away with something rather than walking away from losing something.
Mm. So when I have someone coming to me and they're just super distraught over the breakup, and oftentimes I'll tell them to do this work, like, hey, you need to actually start focusing on yourself. But they have this consistent sort of trend of not doing that. They kind of fall back into thinking so much about their ex. What are they up to? Why are they doing this? Are they dating someone new? Do you have any coping methods that I can give someone who maybe is focusing a little too much on outward stuff as opposed to inward stuff?
Yeah, I think when we focus on outward stuff like that, it takes our power away, right? We feel out of control. Our mood is then determined by what that person is doing or what they're not doing. And so I think when it comes to doing that internal work, it's about asking yourself, like, how can I make myself feel good right now? How can I do something that would help me grow right now? And knowing that when you focus internally, it really, what's the word I'm looking for? It takes the attention away from what you actually can't control and gives it to what you can control, which is you. And those thoughts are probably going to linger. They're probably still going to be floating up there. And I think not the problem, but the thing that a lot of people do is they immediately try to get rid of the thoughts. So they'll try to distract themselves or, or beat themselves up for even thinking about the other person. It's habitual. If you
Mhm.
were in a relationship with that person, you're going to think about them. That's your brain's natural response, is to go back to what it knows. And so, sorry, that's a really loud truck.
Don't worry about it.
um, so what's so important is, you know, focusing, like I said, focusing on what you can control, but also, oh man, that truck distracted me.
It's okay. It's all right.
I was talking about,
Sort of
yeah,
the habitual
the
habits
thoughts.
people have.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so you have those habits, you have those thoughts, and so allow them to be there. They don't have to mean anything. It's just an automatic pattern that's happening in your brain. It's not you intentionally dwelling on it. It's just your brain automatically doing it. And so you can kind of follow that up but like if it comes up, where I like to do what I call positive chasers. So if you go, oh, I wonder what they're doing. I wonder if they're with somebody right now. You could literally flip it and be like, well, what am I doing right now? Could I
Okay.
be doing something fun right now? And you can flip it back towards yourself. And what it does is it trains your brain to refocus your attention away from them and towards yourself.
So I've recommended something similar in the past, which is kind of like catching yourself in those moments and trying to reframe it, which essentially I think
Mhm.
that's what you're talking about. But what's
Yeah.
interesting is what I'm finding is people will do that at first and maybe they'll change that mindset at first, but then they kind of just get back into their old habits. So
Mhm.
what about someone who is trying to do what you're saying, but doesn't have an easy time of sticking to it? Is there some way or advice you have to someone to get them to stick to it? Do you need to give them some sort of like, I don't know, consequence if they don't stick to it? Because sometimes I find like there's this really interesting website. I don't know if you've ever heard about it, but it allows you to basically put money up, and if you pay
Oh
this,
yeah.
have you heard of that? You pay the website
Yes.
the money, and then like if you don't hit the goal, your money's gone. I found that
Yes.
actually works.
Yeah, I've heard of that. I haven't used it personally, but I
I
have heard
haven't
of it.
used it either, but I've read a bunch of stuff on it, and I don't know, it's like a really interesting idea, but I'm just wondering, like, what have you seen work, like, to get
Yeah.
people to stick to it?
I mean, one, I think that's accountability, like that the whole like system of that is accountability. And so, there's multiple ways you can go about that. You can, go to somebody else for support. Um, and that, I mean, that one's a little trickier just because you have to like call yourself out
Yeah,
and
I
be
know.
like, hey, thinking about this person again. But which honestly, a friend of mine does that with me, and find somebody who's going to be like honest and real with you. Because she's like, you won't just let me sit in my pity party, will you? And I was like, no, because I know you don't want to.
So is it
So
like so how does your friend hold you accountable, or how do you hold your friend accountable in that case?
I just kind of, I mean, in that sense, like she'll bring some things up that it's been dwelling, and I'll give her again another truck. I'll give her another perspective to take, or I'll reflect something back to her. Not tell her that she's wrong. Hearing her out, empathizing, but at the same time being like, "Hey, you've already told me you don't want to do this." um, and yeah, helping her in that respect. But if you don't have that person, I think what's helpful, and I can't speak for everybody on this, but I think a lot of times when we get out of that practice, we know we've gotten out of the practice. We're not just completely oblivious to it, but we're like, well, either clearly it didn't work, so I'm not going to keep at it because I'm back here, right? Or it's like, well, I'm too far gone now. Like, what's the point? And so I think it is just a matter of like reminding ourselves, like, hey, I can get back into this. It's like working out, right? If you work out for a bit, you feel great, and then all of a sudden you're like, I haven't worked out for a week. There's no too late when it comes to catching like a
Mm.
habit that you're trying to instill that you've maybe fallen off the wagon with. It's never too late, even when it comes to your thinking or your mentality, and those practices.
So what I personally see is when people go through breakups, I find there's kind of like two types of people. There's the people who are like super action oriented. They're like, I want to get stuff done. And then they can have kind of struggles, which I think is kind of what we're talking about. And then you got the people who just let it break them and they become super depressed and they're very upset. What do you do with people like that? Like, how can you get someone out of their depression where they're lingering so much on this other person and how bad they're feeling? What are some coping things that they can do?
um, Again, it comes right back to action. That first piece of the framework I was talking about, I mean, it's literally how I help people get out of depression when they're bedridden and they can't get up, or they can't leave their
S-
house because their anxiety is so bad. It's taking a very little step, right? And for me, it actually started with making my bed, because I would maybe
Wow.
like start, yeah,
So that's like the first little small task that kind of
mhm.
leads to momentum.
Yes, that's the whole intention behind it. So for me, I would get depressed in the middle of making my bed, and normally I would just like lay back down in it, and I was like, okay, I'm done.
So
But
what are some of the thoughts you have as you're making your bed and become more depressed? Like what are some of the things that you think, is it like one singular thought that kind of leads you down the rabbit hole, or is it just like there's like this cause and effect to it where you think one thought and then the next thought's worse, then the next thought's worse and it just kind of goes. For you personally, what was that as you're making your bed?
For me, I don't think it was as much thoughts, which I know is the case for plenty of people. For me, it was the habit of being sad. I was in the habit
Okay.
of
So
being
you're
sad.
just so used to it, which I
And so
think
I would just all of a sudden start to cry. Like my big thing was I was like, I don't know why. I don't know why I'm
okay.
crying. I don't know why I'm sad. It doesn't, you don't need to know why to take action and change it.
So you took action by basically making your bed first.
I
And
would
maybe it
make
was a
myself
little
finish.
okay, so you had to make yourself finish. You'd have to kind of fight through the like why am I so sad type thing.
hmm
What was the next habit for you? Like I'm just trying to give people like an idea of like here's what the small looks, here's what medium looks like, here's what a big one looks like. So what was like the
Yeah.
next thing you had to do?
Yeah. For, for me, it was in the course of making the bed or like another example on top of
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So let's say you finish the bed. What's your
Mhm.
next action to get you kind of going?
Right. So I would make so this is I love to call it tough love. So the tough part would be making the bed, right?
Okay.
Which shouldn't seem tough.
No, no, I
And that's
mean,
what a lot of people beat themselves up about. They're like,
yeah.
all I did was make my bed. Don't shame that. And that leads to the next point. So I do the tough and then I do the love. So I'd make myself finish making my bed and then I'd appreciate myself for making my bed
So you
and tell
basically give
myself,
yourself like a reward.
yeah,
So
like
you
just
do the hard
affirming
action. Okay. And
rather
so
than
your affirmation would just be something internal that you would tell yourself?
yeah, I mean, it wasn't even like a specific affirmation. Like I've done things like I've literally had times where I'd like just pat myself on the back and I'm like, you did it. Good job.
So what was the next action? Was it like making breakfast or something?
Yeah, another very small task. It could be picking up a couple pieces of clothes off the floor. It depends on how deep you are. The thing to be mindful of is if you're pretty deep in that, it needs to be small and it needs to accumulate. If you're not that deep, then maybe you can go bigger. But the goal is to not do something that's I don't think there's anything that's too little, but you don't want to go too big because then it becomes overwhelming. So somebody might try to get out of depression and be like, today I'm going to do laundry, which includes 4 to 5 loads of laundry. That's a big task. And so they'll
Mm.
do one load and then be like, oh my gosh, I'm sinking back into it. Like, but it was too big a task. So they weren't able to complete it and then reward themselves and then go on to something else.
So you almost have to have this consistency of these small tasks to build this foundation in which you can kind of move on to some of the bigger tasks.
Yeah.
So, in your experience, when you're going through these depressive bouts, I know, so I personally had never struggled from depression until last year when I was a very active individual. So I would always go play tennis. I'd go for like 6, 7 mile runs a day. And I ended up getting something called a pilonidal cyst, which required surgery. And the surgeon botched the surgery. And I was basically on bed rest and I couldn't get out of bed, like literally can't get out of bed. I'm laying on my side all day long. And I couldn't see my wife, I couldn't see my kid. It was just like for months, this is, I had to get 3 surgeries because there were complications, and it just left me ultimately depressed, where you like don't want to get out of bed, you don't want to get moving. And I remember even when I would try some of those small tasks, I had a tendency to kind of get kind of in that really bad state of mind. So what of people who are trying to do what you're saying, but they consistently maybe get some momentum going, but then their depression maybe just overcomes them a little bit. What do you
Right.
what do you do for someone like that?
Um, One thing I always recommend is, um, letting, like, if you feel like if it's really upsetting, let yourself let out the emotion. Now, a lot of times when we let out the emotion, we let our thoughts can fuel our emotions can fuel our thoughts, right? It works both
Okay.
ways.
There's like a synergy between the two.
hmm And so sometimes there will be no thought and an emotion will arise, right? All of a sudden, you'll just overwhelmingly feel sad. And then somebody will be like, okay, I'm just going to sit down and cry or whatever it may be. Or just not even cry, but just like feel into that depression. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. However, what it will end up doing if you're not intentional about it is it will then fuel thoughts to justify why you're feeling so sad, why
Hmm.
you should be laying down, and why you're not worthy, and why this and that and that. And so that emotion will then start to spark a bunch of thoughts, which will make you even sadder. And then it will keep the whole thing going. And so
Mm.
what I encourage my students do is to let the emotion out, like lay in bed, cry, get angry, whatever you need to do. but don't feel like you have to justify it or feed a story or like any of that. I mean, I literally, when I was putting this really into practice, I'd walk out of the room from my kids and I would sit down and I'd cry for 5 minutes. And that's my other tip, is to give yourself a time limit, 5, 10 minutes. Let yourself be in that space. That's okay. Your body wants to let that go. And then, so I would cry, and anytime a thought would pop up, I would imagine it was like a bubble and I would just pop the bubble. I'm like, we don't need to
Hmm.
go there. I don't need to do that. I just need to let my body let this emotion out. And then once the timer was off, I would just take a moment again, kind of shifting into a positive headspace. I'm grateful that I just let myself do that. I'm proud of myself for taking a moment to take care of me, even if that means laying in bed and then moving back out of that.
So from what I'm noticing, you're talking a lot about visualization as well, especially the bubble popping thing. Is that like a consistent tactic you would try as well with, like, how you talk about this kind of synergy between the thoughts and the emotions, and how kind of one can feed the other. Was visualization something you would do to maybe stop that negative trend going?
Yeah, yeah, and I think it always depends on the person. Some people are very visual, some people aren't, and so I think whatever works for you.
Mm.
Even if a thought pops up and you're like, we don't need to do that right now. Like, just communicating with yourself. I don't need to think that right now. I just need to cry, or I just need to, do this or that. So you can communicate with yourself. You can imagine it, however you need to imagine it, and just letting that out. So,
So you obviously have students you work with.
mhm.
What are some of the most common problems you see when you're working with people?
That's a broad question. Honestly, I think the biggest, and this is what led me to end up making my follow-up program, is that when people are in that place of sadness or feeling lost or clinging to what's outside of them, there isn't a connection with themselves. And so I do see that very commonly, and that's why valuing self is one of the modules in my main program, Beat the Bad, because we want to learn how to connect with ourselves, how to be who we want to be, regardless of anything outside of us or who we're with. And when people can create that connection, it fuels a lot of self-love. And I know I've had students end marriages, leave relationships, and really be able to act on their behalf, and then get into relationships with people that are just so compatible with them because they're just being true to themselves.
So you're really talking about, like, kind of having a strong sense of self, which
Yes,
maybe someone who's depressed doesn't have a strong sense of self. They kind of
right,
lose themselves in the depression. Is that like an accurate sort of assessment?
for sure.
Okay, so what are some of your tips to gain a stronger sense of self? Because I see breakups are a little bit different, but I mean, there's a lot of compatibility between the depression and the breakup. It's kind of like a cause and effect. The
Yeah.
breakup causes people to get upset, angry, depressed. And then in that, they focus so much on the breakup, they lose themselves. And sometimes many of them have lost themselves to the relationship to begin with. So one of the reasons maybe their partner broke up with them is the fact that they were too codependent on this person. So what have you seen work when it comes to retaining that sense of self, or even gaining a sense of self in general? Because some people just use other people to kind of like gain their own sense of self.
Yeah. And I think that's honestly embedded in us through our culture, that,
Mm.
like, right, we need the other half. We need the
Yes.
person
Yeah,
that
yeah.
completes us.
Find the one, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yes. Yeah. And so
so
I think
you're
that's
saying we should blame society for it, right?
for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Disney is who's to blame. All those Disney princess things.
Yes. I was having a conversation with a friend. I was like, can I have the movie where I'm the prince and the princess and that be it?
They
I
try,
saved myself.
they try to reinvent the wheel sometimes, but they always never do. I think it was maybe Tangled was the closest thing to that. I don't know.
Now she's still in a relationship. She
Oh
still
yeah.
gets saved by
Well, I've
a
got a
brave.
4-year-old daughter, so I'm up to date on all the Disney movies.
I
Frozen
think
2, I've heard it all.
Yeah, I think Elsa and then, Merida from Brave is probably the closest
Merida.
we've gotten. Yeah.
I don't know Elsa though. Well, she doesn't. It's her sister who's in the relationship, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Anyways, sorry.
Anyway,
Go.
tangent. I've got
We're gonna
I've got
talk
a
2 hours
3
about Disney princesses. You
serious
gotta
I've got a
find one, you know.
I got a 3 and a 6-year-old, so I feel you.
A girl or a boy?
Girls,
Okay, so two girls. You guys been to
yes.
Disney yet?
Oh, yeah, we used to live in Florida, so that was, like, our
Oh,
jam.
we
Like,
live in
we would
Florida, like right down the road from Disney. Yeah,
How awesome!
yeah.
Yeah,
Except we had. Okay, this is. Well, maybe we'll talk after. This is getting way off topic.
Okay, okay. We'll talk Disney later.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Oh my goodness, what was I gonna say? We
Uh,
were
what was the question again? It was something in regards like, okay, you got a sense of self. You're trying to get your sense of
Yes,
self back.
yes,
And
okay,
then
okay.
somehow we got into this tangent on Disney princesses and why there's no Disney princess that saves herself, and she's always saved by the guy in some way, shape, or form.
There we go. Okay, we got it. We brought it all back. See, guys,
Yeah, right.
this is just a good conversation. I'm all about tangents. But yeah, so when it comes to sense of self, I think personally, I know when my relationship ended, I was so into using that as an opportunity to choose who I am, and I think that's the beautiful part, that a lot of people don't see is when they feel lost, when they don't know who they are. That's an opportunity on a silver platter. You don't have to find who you are. You get to create who you are to a certain degree. There are things about ourselves, and I love to challenge beliefs a lot. But we get to accept parts of ourselves that are there. And even when you were, talking about, because it was when you were sharing your story about getting having to be on bed rest, a part of your identity felt lost in that moment. You're
A
like,
huge
I'm not
part.
an there was an identity misalignment. You were like, I'm not
Yes.
the active person I know I am. And so it
Oh,
was
that was
making
my way
you
of coping with
miserable.
stress too. That was like one of the
Yeah,
actions I would do to like get things out, and then that's taken
right.
away. You know.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's about either kind of temporarily shifting our identity that in this moment, I'm not the athletic person, and that's okay. But I can be somebody who's still in touch with sports or learning or whatever, you know what I'm saying? Like you can find your outlets, but when it comes to relationships, we either look to another person to find our identity, or yeah, we get so lost in it. And so it's just that constant affirmation of this is who I am, and reminding yourself of that, and making that choice. Maybe, I mean, literally a year ago, I was like screaming at my kids a lot.
Mm.
It was a
That
form
is
of
a very common problem. My wife is always like, "You need to stop yelling." I'm just like, "I'm trying," that
yeah,
they always do something that kind of sets you like, "Oh no, no, don't do that." We got a
yeah,
puppy, and she's being a little too rough with the puppy. So,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
but
and
yeah,
it, and it's something that you do so repeatedly, it kind of almost becomes a part of your identity that you just scream,
and
like
they're
that's
little
what you just do.
mirrors too, so they'll let you
Mhm.
know,
Oh
you
yeah, they
know?
do.
Yeah.
I use my kids as my sounding board. Like when they start getting crazy, I'm like, am I being crazy?
Yeah, right?
But yeah, like, so I think it's a matter of, I chose one day, I was like, I don't want to be the parent that screams. I don't want to be the person that gets loud to be in control. I don't want to be that person anymore. And so we kind of have to allow this death of the old self, because in order to be a newer version of ourselves, or to choose, our identity or who we are, we have to, one, be intentional about choosing it. And how does that person feel? How do they act? What do they believe? But at the same time, being okay with letting go of that other piece of ourselves. And some people really identify with being the girlfriend, or being the boyfriend, or being or even being the victim, or being lost. Like that is part of their identity. And I think that's sometimes what's difficult, is people don't realize they have to actually let that piece go.
So, it's interesting you talk about letting some of the, I guess, negative beliefs you have about yourself go, and maybe not being consumed by this. How like you're using the yelling as an example. You're just
Right.
like, wait, I need to get, I this is an opportunity for me to like recreate my reality.
Mhm.
Have you found with your clients when you're working with them that people struggle with this concept of basically creating their new reality?
Um, Sometimes yes and sometimes no. It's always going to depend on the person. Anyone that has struggled, sometimes they just need a reminder. They just need a reframe. And so, what I teach them is again those positive chasers. I use that to unearth old beliefs, old ways of thinking, instilling new ones, because once you chase it enough, it becomes the primary thought, and
Mm,
the other one becomes secondary and then falls away. I mean, I used to be like the champion of finding crap in everything, like just the worst in people, in situations. I had like a gold medal in it. And now I'm literally known for what I call gratitude nuggets. And that was an intentional shift of how kind I am, how grateful I am about things. That was an intentional creation of self. And with my students, sometimes experiences will throw them off. So they'll be really like they'll be this version of themselves that they want to be, and then all of a sudden, one of my students actually just reached out to me, and she was like, "I'm just so sad. We're selling our house." Like it was just a lot of negative thinking.
mm.
And I was like, well, here's the opportunity in that. Here's the beauty in that. Yes, you're leaving your home, but you get to give it to another family, and it was just a slight reframe. And she was like, oh my gosh, yeah, duh. And she was able to like click back into
Mhm.
herself. And she's like, yeah, I think positive, and get back into that
Well,
space.
that's the perfect segue because you have so much to offer on your website. So I went to your about page before the interview. I don't know, maybe you have more than this now, but you said you've written 4 books.
Yes.
You're about to launch a program. You
Yes.
have a program, and you've got a pretty awesome podcast.
Yes.
So why don't we talk about all of those things?
Yes, yes, yes. So, thank you so much for sharing all of that. So, yeah, I have a podcast called Simply Happy with Simply Ollie. I share lots of tips and strategies. It's very tactical for people to apply. So, I talk about even relationships on there, so you can go listen to that. I also have my books. Back to Happy, Break the Chain, 10 Days to Self Love, The Opportunity Journal.
So
So I
where can
have
people find those?
Yeah, everything is at www.simplyollie.com.
So the books, are they like ebooks type things? Can they be found on like the Kindle store, or is it just all digitally on the website?
Yeah, one of my books is digital. The other ones are available on Amazon, and you can also get
Okay.
digital copies of them.
Hard book
So
back. Okay,
hard
so
books,
they're
yes.
they're legit books, you
They're
know?
legit. They're published.
Okay. And what about the program? So you mentioned before we started recording, you got a new program running, but before we talk about that, let's talk about the old program or the
Yes,
the
thank
current
you.
program up,
Yes. So my
which has
signature
a
program.
super cool name, by the way.
Yeah, my signature program is called Beat the Bad. Of course, that stands for bipolar anxiety and depression. And so, that really is for people who are struggling with mental illness. Meds and therapy maybe isn't working for you. You've tried all the things, nothing feels like it's working. That program is really how I beat it, and that's what I bring to everyone. And we have a community. It's just a really great way to be, and people feel so heard and understood because it's coming from someone who knows what it's like to be in that space, not just textbook knows, but knows.
Yeah, yeah, who's gone through it and has the way I look at you is you've basically used your own life as a way of figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And
I am
maybe
my
what
own guinea pig.
yeah, I guess so. But I'm assuming you find it's different for every single person, right? Like what works for people, or is the framework pretty much generalized, like it works no matter
So the
what?
framework actually starts, we kind of start off teaching you some tools, right, to use, like stepping in, making the bed, stuff like that. Then we move into you actually understanding your own personal episodes, what your emotions are like, and learning how to practice what tools work for you and resonate with you. And then we finish it off with you kind of making changes in your life that would then better benefit you. So it really isn't me telling you all the exact steps like go breathe, exercise, eat food, like
Go
like
breathe.
'cause go breathe, because a lot of people are doing that. They're trying to tell you, oh, you just need to exercise more, it'll fix
Yeah.
everything. It is different for every person, and so that program is actually built for you to learn how to listen to yourself and
So
be able to
that's
customize your approach.
that's the current program, Beat the Bad, correct? And how
Yes.
much is that program?
That program is 1,200, but I do offer payment plans that bring it down to about two something a month to make it a little more affordable for
So
people.
do they also get access to you when they get into the
Y-
program? Is there like a private
yes.
Facebook group, or is it like
Yep.
one-on-one type coaching?
Yeah, so they get lifetime access to the program and the Facebook group. So we have grads in there that have been in there for years, that are still supporting, even new students that join, which is really cool.
Those are the best people,
Um,
by the way, too, aren't they? Yeah.
yes. Yeah, and so yeah, the program is modules that they get to work through, but then we have the community, where you get to ask questions. We do live, coaching and Q&As. So I'm in there directly supporting you in that community, along with
What
everybody else.
let's talk about the new program,
Yes, yeah. So my new program is called Beyond the Bad, and
which
it's
again, super cool name.
thank you, thank you. And yeah, that one's a 12-week program that is centered around really owning who you are, right? Creating who you want to be, and being able to navigate that and live confidently and fearlessly from that space.
So when is that launching exactly?
That is launching July 20th of this month. And you can even go to my website, or you can go to www.simplyollie.com slash, I call it BayTB, so BEY TV.
Okay.
And you can get on the wait list there. So yeah.
Okay. So she's got a lot she's doing, but she's got the podcast, she's got 4 books, she's got 2 programs. I highly recommend you check her out. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.